Yeah, eventually, Dave Mustaine, who was, of course, making the final call, was like, okay, he probably looked at some videos online or whatever, and was like, let's call this guy and see how he is. And so Dave called me, we spoke. And from there, it was like, okay, well, we'll do one rehearsal before Rock on Range in Columbus. So, so I came home from the Soilwork tour, learned the set in like 10 days, which was a decent amount of time. I've had to learn sets in 2 days. So 10 days was fine. I had time to like sit down, figure everything out, get all the details straight. And then from there, one rehearsal where we didn't even play the full set. And then the next day we were playing in front of 40,000 people in Columbus. So.
Wow. Today our guest is longtime Meinl Cymbals artist Dirk Verbeuren. Dirk is known around the world as the drummer for the legendary metal band Megadeth. I met up with Dirk for this interview in Franklin, Tennessee, a little town right outside of Nashville. The band was writing for their new album in an old farmhouse that's been restored, and it could not have been a more seemingly conflicting scene. There I was in the lion's den of one of the most successful metal bands to ever roam the earth, a band with song titles like Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good, and that proverbial lion's den was actually a tranquil house situated on acres of farmland with cows, songbirds, sweet-smelling Tennessee grass, flowers in bloom, and just a lazy, beautiful countryside. Metal, right? Dirk was born in Belgium and was raised there until his teens, where he then went to Paris and spent the rest of his formative years. That's where drumming found him. He grew up as a Belgian metalhead in Paris and quickly began a career at a young age that has taken him around the globe touring and recording, and always with both feet firmly planted in the world of metal. Just like with the dichotomy of the pastoral setting I previously mentioned and the metallic riffage that's being written in that pastoral setting, Dirk seems to me to be a dichotomy. Most photos you see of him have him with his metal grimace, his hands outstretched, doing the cantaloupe or the watermelon, holding those invisible fruits in a sinister metal pose. But talking with Dirk for 30 seconds clues you into the fact that he is quite possibly one of the kindest and most easygoing human beings you will ever meet. And that kindness, along with his veins pumping the blood of a true metalhead, is why I think he has come so far in his career. To have suddenly found himself manning the throne for Dave Mustaine's legendary outfit, it really could not have happened to a nicer guy. So, Dirk and I sat on some rustic chairs in a rustic bedroom that looked off into the woods, and so you may hear some echo off the wooden floors, but don't let this quaint setting distract you from the task at hand. I came to pick the brains of one of the most respected metal drummers out there. Anyone who is familiar with Dirk's drumming knows that he is a crazy good shredder, and I wanted to know his story of how he came to this point. Oh, and the music you hear in the background, that's Dirk's band, Bent C. It's a project that he's doing with Shane Embury from Napalm Death and Sven from The Aborted. The song is called Partners in Grind. So on to the interview. I'd like to welcome everybody into the Meinl Radio Podcast. Today we have the one and only Dirk Verbeuren with us.
Pleasure to be here.
We're in Franklin, Tennessee, in a really unlikely place. We're in some house that the band Megadeth has rented out for writing purposes. Mm-hmm. It's a super old home, but it's been renovated. It's pretty cool, actually.
It is. If there was ever an ideal situation to be working on a record, this would probably be it. Like, this is like my wildest dreams when I was 16, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, super cool, man. So, I'm a pretty big nerd. I'm going to start with the nerdiest of nerd questions.
Please, shoot it at me.
So, you're from Belgium.
I am.
Okay. Despite the fact that it's a country in Western Europe, it's known for medieval towns, Renaissance architecture. It's the headquarters of the European Union and NATO. Mm-hmm. Because of the fact that there's been so many battles there since the 1600s that it's called the battlefield of Europe.
Yeah.
A lot of people here, at least in the States, aren't totally familiar with it. If you said Belgium, they may have a vague idea. Mm-hmm. So you'll have to forgive us.
Yeah, it's all
Most
good.
of our listeners are here in the U.S., so I want to give people an idea about where you're from. They speak French and Dutch there. Those are the two primary languages. Mm-hmm. I know German's also spoken to a small degree.
Yep.
What was your first language that you learned when you were born?
So we call it Flemish, which is Dutch. Like, Dutch is the official language. Flemish is kind of like the accent as it's spoken in the northern part of Belgium. And then, of course, you have a whole lot of regional and local accents, But we call it Flemish because Flanders East Flanders and West Flanders is kind of like the important regions or like the essential regions throughout history in northern Belgium. And in the southern part, which is closer to, which touches upon the French border, that's where people speak French. And so I came from the Flemish side, and that was my language, but I had notions of French kind of early on, because that's kind of normal, I guess, in the country. And but the funny thing is that it's it's not really funny, it's kind of sad. It's like the country is super divided politically because of those two language regions. And like in recent years, I don't know exactly how it is now, I haven't followed up, but in recent years we didn't have a government in Belgium for like 2 years. That's how bad like the battle between the French speaking and the Flemish speaking people was in some way. Yeah.
Now, is the Flemish language actually, is it a derivative from Dutch?
It is Dutch. So it's technically, that's the official name. Like Flemish is, I don't think, a language. It's more like a dialect or an accent. So if I go to the Netherlands, I can understand people perfectly and speak to them, but they have different kind of words that they use to describe certain things, and a very different sounding dialect as well.
So what do people in Holland think of the Flemish?
Oh, we like to chastise each other. That's kind of a thing. It's kind of like what I understand between Swedes and Norwegians. It's like kind of a friendly, like making fun of the other group over there.
Yeah. We do it everywhere, don't we?
Yeah.
So in Belgium, you played violin and guitar. Mm-hmm. And then when you were a teenager, you moved to Paris.
Yes, that's correct.
And then in Paris, you picked up playing the drums.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's funny because music was really present as soon as I was born, thanks to my parents. They always had vinyl as long as I can remember. They were both coming from musical families, and both, my grandparents on both sides were religious people, and so going to church, singing, playing guitar in the church band. My mom used to sing and play piano. My dad also did both of those things and guitar. And so there was always, just kind of, imagine before the whole internet era, people just getting together at night like friends and just jamming songs. That was the thing. And then of course my dad would tell me these stories about how he would grow up and like secretly at night tune into the evil rock and roll, hear like the Stones and stuff, and be like oh my gosh, if my parents heard this evil music.
Yeah.
So but anyways, when I was a kid, that was always around. And so the natural inclination was, I remember I thought my parents said, yeah, you should do an instrument, but they told me later, that was kind of my idea, and they told me when I was growing up, they're like, no, you wanted to do it. Like the school offered these programs, and we asked you, do you want to do something? And he said, yeah, I want to play violin. So I don't know where that came from, but I was 7 or 6 at the time. So, but yeah.
Could be a lot worse things.
Could be worse.
Yeah. Well, so you picked up drums in France.
Yeah.
And this would have been probably if you're maybe around 15, 16?
Something like that, yeah. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but it must have been either 90 or 91, around there.
Okay, so my point is pre-internet.
Yes.
So just like me, you grew up with magazines and TV and radio as your means for taking in everything that was influencing you.
Yeah.
So what was it like growing up? Now wait, you were into metal as a kid? Like as a teenager, by the time you were playing drums, were you digging metal?
Yes, yeah. Metal was a big impetus for me, along with old school hip hop like Beastie Boys, Run DMC, very cool. Beat driven, stuff. Yeah.
So okay, as far as being a drummer and playing metal goes, which magazines were your go-to magazines? What were your points of light to educate you on everything you didn't know about at that point? So
interestingly enough, in France we had a couple of cool metal magazines like Hard Rock and Rock Hard and Hard and Heavy were like the 3 ones I remember. But interestingly enough, I started reading Metal Maniacs pretty early on, the US publication. I got a subscription, and because I lived briefly in the US as a young kid, I went to first grade in Rochester, Minnesota, because my dad worked there for a little bit. So the whole, I was very in touch with American culture, not only through music, but also having lived there for a while. And that was at the time when like Prince was really big and Tina Turner and all this stuff. So I was like, Madonna, like, so all that stuff really was important for me as a younger kid. And so when it came time to educate myself on metal, I was like, I want to go to the US because I felt like they had more of an understanding, than like the French, which I felt was like, those people were really working at it, but French culture is not very, you know, at the time at least, it wasn't very open to metal. You know, it was very like hair metal maybe, but anything heavier was like, what's this noise, you know? And I was into all the heavy stuff.
So that's why Metal Maniacs.
That's why Metal Maniacs.
Because back in the day, there was Circus, there was Hit Parader.
Yeah.
But then you stepped it up for like serious heavy.
Here's the thing. I went from like when I was 11 or whatever, and Bon Jovi in Europe was big. I liked that because I listened to the radio. And then I kind of skipped like the whole Maiden and all that stuff. I never really listened to any of that, Priest, any of that. I went straight from like Bon Jovi to Metallica, Slayer, Morbid Angel, Napalm Death. Like it was like, you know.
Yeah. Well, so, and I'm going to get to that because you just brought up a good point. It's funny though, I've got to say, I've always seen you as one of those guys that lives and breathes metal. At least if anybody followed you on socials and they saw like everything's just metal, which is great. That's like a good thing.
Yeah.
Even your email address is metal. I'm not going to give it out because you don't want that out there, but your email address is metal. The way you sign off on an email, you say grinding greets, and of course with a Z at the end. Like, that's metal. Everything
David
is
Ellison
metal.
always makes fun of me for that.
Dude, it's always been metal, which I love. But it's funny because I feel like you actually personify one of the ironies about people who are really into metal. And I don't know if anybody has really noticed this about a lot of metalheads, but most metalheads are actually the sweetest, kindest, nicest people. And yet they align themselves with this music that has imagery of chaos and death and evil and destruction and grimaces and crazy faces. And
totally.
So it's funny because then they're all sweet, you know? But like you in particular. So
thanks.
Actually, anybody who's watching this should check out your bandmate Kiko has a YouTube channel where he just did an interview, and literally the first question right away is he's talking to you about like, how did you get to be such a nice guy? Why are you always so happy all the time? So when I saw that, I was like, man, he beat me to the question. But so I've told people about your being metal through and through, and you know, it's something that's been on my mind. I have to ask regarding metal. Who was the first metal drummer that made you say, I want to do that?
So without a doubt, for me, you know, that was Dave Lombardo. I still remember vividly the moment I was over, you know, I was a skater, and I was over at a friend's house. We were skateboarding outside, and, you know, the thing back then was we would have the boombox and people would bring tapes, right? Like I got a lot of my stuff through the classic tape trading at school. Like, hey, I got this new stuff. And this buddy in particular would always get a lot of stuff somehow. And I remember he put this thing in, and it was Rain and Blood, the album, and like when Angel of Death with that scream kicked in and the drums, I was like, you know, I was like instantly like, what is this? Like, I need to have this, you know, like I was completely mesmerized by that thing. I probably stopped skating and just was like this, you know. And so that was a huge impact. And then just hearing what, you know, Dave has such a feel to his playing beyond just being, of course, at the time, probably the most intense stuff you could imagine, you know, the feeling of his fills and just that kind of swing that he has that's very unique to Dave Lombardo. That to me was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And like I said, I had already, you know, my parents had already commented on how I was like always tapping the beat to like Beastie Boys and stuff, which, you know, Run DMC, like at the time those beats were so like amazing, right? It was like really beat driven stuff. And I actually know some other metal guys who are kind of influenced by that, but then when this thing came, I was like, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do.
Yeah, dude, that was the Slayer record for me that got me into Dave Lombardo. And the funny thing is, I never hear anybody talk about this part of his playing. Everyone talks about his crazy like his skank punk beats and his crazy hyper fast fills that are kind of like if you took Bill Ward's fills from Sabbath and you sped them up a lot. But nobody ever talks about that insane 2/4 pocket he would do. Like on Angel of Death.
Yeah, exactly. Like
not even that.
Or even
he's taking the hi hat. He's just going. I mean, it's just evil.
That's it. He has his own swing, and I think without having any idea what that was, it just connected with me. And then, of course, the music too, you know, I mean, the whole thing. I mean, I was already a fan of like Metallica and Megadeth and stuff at the time, but like when I heard Slayer, it was just like, man, this is it. This is what I want to do.
That's super cool. Here's something. For me, growing up as a metalhead kid, there were certain cities that I would think of because of bands or clubs or record labels. So, of course, growing up as a kid in East Tennessee, I would think about LA because there was the Roxy, Gazzari's, the Whiskey.
Yep.
And early in the 80s, there were bands like Crew and Rat that I thought of.
Right.
But then I thought of New York because there was L'Amour in Brooklyn, and I never went there, but I'd heard about it. And then there's Megaforce Records, and Anthrax there, and SOD, and all these bands.
Yeah.
Did you ever sit around and think about certain cities that you thought, man, if I could just go there, I would go check this club out, and these bands are from there, and I got to be there?
No, if I was a more, let's say, extroverted person, I would have definitely done that. But I was an extremely introverted kid.
Really?
Okay, I was very unlike how I have grown to be. So I was very, I would say. Here's the thing: when my parents moved to France when I was about 11 or 12 years old, it was a real shock to the system for me because I was already kind of introverted, and then being like all of a sudden 300 miles away from where I grew up in a country with a language that I didn't speak, and just a whole new world, and at the same time, kind of starting high school. So that can be tough already on any kid. But so for me, it was like in a tough place.
You didn't speak any French.
I didn't speak French, very little, like bonjour and a few basic words. So I had to learn from scratch. I was in international school, so I did have friends who spoke, Dutch and English, so I kind of made my way that way. But it was, it was really tough on me, like as a kid. And so I was extremely introverted and kind of lived in my own bubble. And I never thought about, really the outside world. I was just kind of trying to deal with my own stuff.
Yeah, sure.
So I never thought about that. But what I will say is that Paris ended up having a big influence on me because so many bands came through there. That at the time when the whole extreme metal scene was really kind of exploding, as soon as I was old enough, my parents would let me go to shows. So I'd just take the train, go into Paris, and go watch Carcass and Napalm Death, Morbid Angel, all these bands, and Tomb, all these bands play, and I would be this little scrawny 16-year-old kid surrounded by a bunch of beer drinking hellraisers and just take it in, and then I got to meet some of the people too. So some of the guys in the bands would just hang out in front of these tiny venues in their bus and stuff, and just hey man, and I'd go up to them and talk to them. So that ended up having a huge impact on me.
Wow, that's super cool. Yeah. Now you said you skipped the Maiden and Priest step.
Yeah.
Did you ever go back and check it out again?
For some of those bands, yeah, I definitely did. As I grow older, because I think I was just in a phase at the time where if it wasn't super loud and evil vocals and stuff, if it was melodic, I wasn't even interested for a while. Yeah. Then later on, of course, when I was a little bit older, I was like, okay, I want to see what all this, stuff about Priest is about. And they're like, okay, I get it.
Did you find it to be legit?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It just took me time to get back around to that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
You were a part of the Swedish metal band Soilwork, and this went on for 12 years. Mm-hmm. You guys toured a ton. The first time I saw you with Soilwork was on an Ozfest in the early 2000s in Nashville, on the second stage.
I remember this very well.
Yeah. So, but how many albums did you guys record?
The band is on their 12th or 13th, I think. I did 5 with them, so.
Yeah, five albums, multiple world tours, 12 years worth of work.
Yeah.
How did you hook up with a Swedish band being a Belgian kid that lived in France?
Yeah, I know, it's pretty.
And was there a cultural divide? Once you got into the band, was there a cultural divide that no matter how cool everyone was, it was we'll never totally understand each other?
No, here's the thing. I mean, they're all super, the Soilwork guys are super cool. And they got to know me through my own band I had at the time, Scarve. We were on a label called Listenable Records, which happened to be the label that released the first couple of Soilwork albums before they got signed by Nuclear Blast and started kind of, getting bigger. And so I guess the owner of Listenable, a good friend of mine, Lauren, used to send CDs to his bands and stuff, hey, here's my new stuff. And the guys in Soilwork, Bjorn and Peter especially, heard Scarve, my band. And I was really working hard with that band to be of the level of the bands that I listened to, I wanted to play drums as good as Pete Sandoval and Dave Lombardo and all those guys, and we wanted the music to be super pro, so we would actually go to Sweden and have this producer Daniel Bergstrand produce our albums, and one album in particular, we went there and he did the whole thing, so he took all our instruments, drove 2 days from France to Sweden, and he recorded us, so it was really top-notch stuff, and those guys heard that. And then when they were in a bind for a drummer, all of a sudden I got a call from Lauren from Listenable. He said, hey, Peter from Soilwork wants to talk to you, Peter Richards. And I'm like, yeah, sure, give him my number, you know. So he calls me, he goes, hey, we don't have a drummer, you want to do a tour with us? I'm like, yep.
Yeah, totally.
So that's how it started, and you know, and then we did the tour, and it went really good, and so I ended up joining the band like a while later, because they kind of asked me early on, but because I had Scarve, I was kind of torn. Like, we were doing pretty well at the time, and I was like, man. So I kind of did 2 bands, and then after a while I was like, okay, I can't do this. I'm never home. I was literally like going from one tour with one band, coming home 2 days to the tour with the other band, and it was just the schedules, the chaos. I mean, no rest for me. It was just insane.
Yeah.
So I ended up being like, okay, you know, after, especially with experiences like where we met at Ozfest, which was such a huge, like, I mean, that tour is still one of my best memories in music, you know.
Yeah.
That tour was just absolutely mind-blowing at every level.
I bet.
And then I realized, like, okay, you know, this is where I should be.
And being a Belgian kid that grew up also in Paris and now with Swedish guys, was there ever any kind of, like, level of social disconnect, or did you guys all, was it really easy to get along no matter what?
It was easy, and I mainly credit them for that, because, like I said, I was pretty introverted and probably a little bit, you know, probably really shy and stuff around them at the time, and I hadn't toured much, so I wasn't very, you know, I had toured a little, but it was still kind of uncomfortable for me to be on the road. And Peter especially, you know, is a super open, funny, social, amazing person. All the other guys in the band are great as well, but they really took me in. And just, you know, Peter would always, like, he also lives in the States. His wife is American, as is mine, and so he speaks English really, really well. Most Swedes speak English good, but he has like no accent.
Wow.
And so he would really make it a point that, like, if the band was sitting in the front lounge of the bus and all talking Swedish, he'd be like, all right, Dirk's here, let's talk English, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's cool. And
Yeah.
I've been in that situation plenty of times working for Meinl, where everybody's speaking German, and I don't think anybody's being rude.
Right.
They just don't. They're so involved in their conversation.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's my fault for not learning German.
Yeah.
I asked early on, I said, do I
Yeah.
need to learn German? And they said, no, you don't need to. It's fine. We all speak English.
Right.
But
right.
still, there's times where I'm thinking, like, shit, I should have
Yeah.
learned it and been, like, totally quiet about learning it, never told them. So when they start talking smack about me,
you would hear
I can be
everything.
like, wait a minute.
The funny thing is that for me, actually, there's some similarities between Swedish and Dutch, actually.
Oh, okay.
And so sometimes they'd say stuff, and I totally understand what they were talking about, even in the, you know, when I just joined the band, and I'd be like, did you guys just talk about that? And they'd look at me like, wait a minute, did you understand that?
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
some
cool.
good laughs.
So now you live in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Which now more than ever is not the easiest of cities to live in. It's getting messier and more expensive every day.
Yeah.
And this is coming from a guy, I lived there for years, so I know. There was once a time when everybody moved to LA for music.
Yeah.
So do you need to be there for music? Is it because of your wife's photography business that you have to be there? Why LA?
Yeah, it's initially, well, it's my wife's favorite place.
Okay.
So
well, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
there you go. You
Yeah.
know, that right there. But then, you know, when I first when I met her and I moved over there, and we actually moved back to the East Coast for a while and then came back, so we had a little stint of not being in LA. But when I first got there, it was pretty overwhelming for me, because I just, you know, LA is amazing, but it's also massive. So when you just have no idea about anything at first, and even she was showing me stuff, I was like lost. Like, how do I drive here? Like,
Yeah.
you know, hearing the cops like bro with the megaphones, and like I would be like, what's going on? You know, just freaked out a little bit.
Yeah.
But after a few years of being there, I really fell in love with it, and I really loved everything, the climate, the vibe, like the openness of it, you know, just the worldly.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm really in this massive thing where there's always cool stuff happening. There's shows all the time. All the people I love in music are always coming through town, you know. So for me, it's just, I love it. And I know it's a tough city, and I know there's issues. You know, I've seen it. Obviously, we've experienced some of that, but I really just love the place.
Cool. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Which part of town do you live in there?
We're in North Hollywood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so you began filling in for Chris Adler with Megadeth in 2016, right?
That's right.
Okay. How did your connection to Megadeth happen?
It's funny because a few months prior to that, so early 2016, my wife was photographing their show at the Palladium in Hollywood, because she does a lot of stuff for LA Weekly, and she got assigned that gig, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll go. You know, I want to see Megadeth, and so I went there, and then actually Chris Rakestraw, our engineer who's working with us here, happened to be there. He was called on the road to help out with some stuff, so he saw me walking in the venue and texted me like, hey, you're here, cool. I knew him already. So he's a friend of my wife's too, and so he said, why don't you come meet us backstage afterwards, and hang out. And so I kind of hang out. I didn't meet Dave at the time, or David, but I hang out with Chris, with Chris Adler, with Tony Laureano, the drum tech, who was also a guy that I toured with many years before. So I've known him. And so, Kiko, who I had met prior, because he had come to a Soilwork show and we had talked and stuff. So there was some connections there. And then a few months later, I'm on the road with Soilwork, and I get a text from Chris Adler actually saying, hey, what are you doing in the next few months? Just checking, And I was like, oh, I have a tour now, but after that, I'm going to be, we have some summer gigs and stuff. And then next thing I know, I get a call from management saying, hey, Dave Mustaine wants to talk to you. I'm like, okay. But I guess everybody had kind of talked about the situation with Chris being busy with Lamb of God and stuff. And so lists were made of like, who are some people that could do the gig? And obviously Kiko vouched for me. He knew me, Tony Laureano knew me. So there's a lot of people that kept saying Dirk. So
your name
kept
coming up.
Yeah, eventually, Dave Mustaine, who was of course making the final call, was like, okay, he probably looked at some videos online or whatever. I was like, let's call this guy and see how he is. And so Dave called me, we spoke. And from there it was like, okay, well, we'll do one rehearsal before Rock on Range in Columbus. So I came home from the Soilwork tour, learned the set in like 10 days, which was a decent amount of time. I've had to learn sets in 2 days. So 10 days was fine. I had time to sit down, figure everything out, get all the details straight. And then from there, one rehearsal where we didn't even play the full set. And then the next day we were playing in front of 40,000 people in Columbus. So
wow. Did you have any nerves that day?
Yeah, I did. I'm not going to lie.
No, rightfully so. So it had to have been somewhat helpful that you probably, at least some of the set, you knew it just from having listened to those songs as a fan growing up?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I went to music school in the northeast of France in a city called Nancy, and I remember we played like Hangar 18. My buddies and I used to jam Symphony of Destruction. So of course, like these classic songs are like, how could you not know them?
Yeah.
So there's definitely that helped. Those songs were like the last ones that I made my charts for and stuff, because I was like, yeah, Symphony, I got this.
All right, so I'm going to skip ahead a question, because now you made me think about it. There's been a line of serious drummers that have been in Megadeth.
Yeah.
Starting with Gar Samuelson, who we all have to bow down.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Now, I have to ask, which of those drummers' parts that you had to learn were the most difficult?
Well, definitely his,
Gar's.
No doubt, yeah.
Nothing off of Rust in Peace with Nick Minza?
I mean, that stuff is there's some hard stuff there, for sure, but Nick had a more sparse playing style, and that's no criticism. He had a more, his stuff is very easy to pick up when you're listening as a drummer, because it's not super busy most of the time. There's some tricky things there, but it's very distinguishable. With Gar, it's like, partly because of the old recordings, the
everything's kind of buried.
Yeah, the 2 albums that he played on, even though they've been remixed and remastered and it's better now, but the originals that I had were like, it's buried. And his playing style is just so crazy and busy, dense, jazzy, which is kind of how I play. I play very dense. Like for me, restriction is like one of the things I struggle with.
Yeah,
I always want to hit every drum, and every cymbal at all times.
It's a funny thing about Gar. Did you ever play from the Meinl Cymbals? Did you ever play the anything from the MB20?
That used to be my thing. Yeah.
Okay, so did you ever play that 22 heavy bell ride?
That was my ride.
Okay, so back when Norbert and I were designing the MB20 series with the guys at Meinl Germany, we needed a ride and to go with that series, and literally all I did was tell Norbert that I want the ride sound from The Conjuring.
There you go.
That's what I want. It's going to be a little hard to hear, but in the background you're going to hear this bell.
Man,
that's what I want.
That is amazing.
I don't want any wash. And I said, and there's one more song to listen to. Listen to Good Morning Black Friday. But anyway, just the part where Gar's just...
Exactly, yeah.
That's on Wake Up Dead. But anyway, point being, that bell sound.
Right. Man, that's amazing, because it's so funny. We just started playing The Conjuring live again on our recent tours. Like last year. Now we haven't played live for a bit, but we started playing, which is such a just epic song. I still remember when I first heard, that was my first album, was Peace Sells by Megadeth, and first hearing like The Conjuring and stuff, I was just like, what is this, and so it's so funny, because that's my favorite ride. I mean, it's like
and that came from that song.
Yeah.
From me saying I want this.
Full circle.
And that's my favorite Megadeth song is The Conjuring. Like that's the one.
Yeah.
Anyway, so interesting, Gar. Okay.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Was it hard when you had to finally make a choice? Was it hard for you to leave Soilwork and that whole part of your life behind, or was it just time?
It was time. It was hard, of course, because you when you've spent that long in a band, and I love all the guys and I love the music, it's always hard. But it was time. There had been a few years prior to the Megadeth thing coming around where I was kind of starting to feel like, I need to, there's something's brewing, like something's happening. I wasn't sure what. My wife and I had talked about it, and I think it was just unfortunately like when you're in a band like Soilwork, and this goes for many bands, goes for my old band Scarve at a very much smaller level. It's like you reach a plateau, and it's very hard to break that, because when you're not the young and upcoming new thing anymore, and you don't hit a certain height, it's going to be very hard to do that after you have 10 albums under your belt or 8 albums or whatever, because then you're kind of like you're there. The people who know you might gain some new fans, but Soilwork always struggled, unfortunately, with like management issues and things like that. And so I kind of felt like we were at a plateau no matter how hard I was pushing, no matter how hard we're working to get places. And so for me, I kind of felt a little bit like, I was struggling to make ends meet because, 6 guys in a band, touring a lot, not making a whole lot of money. It was tough. And then I'm living in LA, which is, as you mentioned, not the cheapest city to live in. And I was like, I don't want to leave here. I want to be here. So it was tough for me. I had to work really hard, both with the band and outside of the band, to kind of make it work. So when the Megadeth call came, of course, at first I was only supposed to fill in, but I instantly started thinking about, if this would become a permanent gig, what do I do? So I thought about it for a while, and then when the offer came, I was kind of ready.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, you said something a second ago where you said that you supplemented your touring income from also doing other work.
Yeah.
So you've done a lot of session work.
Yes.
If anybody goes onto your website, which is just dirkverbeuren.com,
mm-hmm.
and they click on the releases button up top, it'll drop down this crazy number of album covers that you've been on. I mean, I had to keep scrolling. It was insane. I'm looking at it going, holy shit, he's recorded a lot.
Yeah.
And what's cool is you'll be able to add a Megadeth record to that as well.
Yeah.
That'll be super cool.
That would be very cool.
So, all that session work, why do you think you've had so much work before as a session drummer?
That's actually a great question that I'm not quite sure I know the answer to. It's funny because it started with just local stuff in France. Like, hey, I know you from this and this, like our drummer is, leaving or hurt his ankle. I remember I filled in for some friends once because the drummer hurt his ankle and his kid was set up, and they're like, you need to come to the studio now and like play this stuff because we're losing studio time, that kind of thing. So I would do stuff like that and pull it off, and sometimes struggling, but pull it off. And so I guess word at the time, it was, it wasn't so much internet. I didn't have a website. I wasn't advertising. It was more like people talking, and me doing shows throughout the country, and then other people would be like, hey, do you know somebody? Yeah, that guy Dirk,
Mm-hmm.
And then Scarve, my band, the albums would kind of, we kind of built a name for ourselves. And then it became like, then I worked with like Aborted from Belgium. Sven is a good friend of mine. And so that became kind of a big thing because the album I played on became like an underground kind of, classic death metal album in the early to mid 2000s, so which unbeknownst to us, we had no idea, but that album really kind of built a name for Aborted at the time. So that became a big thing. So I did a few of those things, like that, where it sort of kind of built my profile, I guess. Now, when I met my wife, around a few years after that, she was like, you don't have a website? What do you mean you don't have a website? We're going to make you a website. She's done that with me for like dirkverbeuren.com, Facebook, Instagram, like all that stuff. I was like, I don't want to deal with that crap. And she'd be like, I'm going to do it for you then. Right, so she'd start it, and then I'd be after a while like, okay, yeah, this is cool. I'll do it. Yeah. So much credit to Hannah for getting me out there, because then I, of course, started being like, hey, like you said, showing like I've recorded all this. And then now like purely saying like, hey, I'm available, book me for session work, because I love doing session work.
And I assume that this takes up all of your time right now.
Yeah.
Are you having to turn down session work at the moment, or does everybody just know, like, no, dude, he's working with Megadeth?
Yeah, I mean, I get offers in all the time, so I pick and choose kind of, what works, but there's always downtime. I mean, like once this is done, I'm probably going to be home for a while. We're not going to be touring this year, so I'll have to keep working, you know, and as much as, you know, of course the focus is on Megadeth, if I can do other stuff, you know, that helps pay the bills and stuff, I'm going to have to do it, you know.
Is you have a studio at home?
I just have a small electronic studio at home, but I have, so with like a Roland kit and stuff, and I use Toontrack Superior Drummer. I've used that for many years. So for those who want the smallest budget possible, which a lot of the people I work with are, you know, don't have big recording budgets, so that can be a really good solution. And I also have an acoustic setup in a friend's studio nearby, so I can go there and do acoustic drums, which is a little bit more expensive, but then you got the acoustic drums and it sounds killer. So
yeah. So one question that just came to mind that I hadn't even written down ahead of time. You've been with the same companies for a really long time.
Yeah, I'm that kind of guy.
No, it's a good thing. I'm not complaining. Dude, I actually got an email this morning from an artist that I'm sitting there having coffee at home and I'm checking emails on my iPhone, and the first thing he said was, "Hey man, I want to tell you how good you've been to me over the years." And any email like that is a breakup email. I've not had many of them, but I've had enough to know. And so when I saw this, I'm like, oh, literally the words that came out of my mouth were, oh, fuck. Yeah. Because this is a guy I don't want to leave.
Right.
I love this dude.
Right.
And but then he was just saying nice things. And then he went ahead to tell me he needed some replacements. And all he was saying was, hey, it's been a big year. And you were the first one there for me, so thanks. Anyway, I need some replacements, and I'm like, oh shoot! But
dodged the bullet.
Yeah, it was a little weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've been with the same companies now for a while, Tama and Meinl, and are you Evans and ProMark?
I actually use Tama sticks.
Tama sticks, that's right. You even got your own Tama stick.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So why the same companies for so long?
I mean, the reason why I was with these companies in the first place, for me at least, you know, people will say, oh, you get endorsements. Yeah, of course, you know, and that is extremely helpful. But I chose stuff that I like. Like I remember, like with Meinl, you know, everybody knows that Meinl started off modestly. And I remember kind of knowing Meinl as not the best brand out there. You know, everybody was always talking about Sabian and Zildjian and whatever. And so one day I went to some drum store trying out some stuff, and this was around the time when Meinl was really stepping it up and becoming like an international level, you know, the brand it is now. And I was trying stuff and I was like, this stuff is great. This is amazing, you know. And then maybe the next year or so I did a drum clinic somewhere in France and Thomas Lang was headlining there and Norbert was there from Meinl. And so they had put a thing online where you could apply for, like, you know, we're looking for endorsees. Again, this was the time when they're really building it up. So I had filled something out and sent it over. And I was like, I'm just going to go up to Norbert and be like, hey, did you get my thing, you know? And you'll laugh about this. And so he goes, yeah, you know, we probably got it. I'll let you know. So I was like, okay, obviously he's not, you know, not interested in stuff. And so the next day we were still there. I think we had breakfast and stuff. And then I was going to go drive back. And I was like, hey, by the way, you know, my band Soilwork just got confirmed for Ozfest in 2005. This was, and he was like, Ozfest? Okay, yeah, I'll send you an email on Monday, and he did, you know, and that's how it started.
Yeah.
But for me, it was still like a thing where, you know, I wouldn't have done all that if I didn't already love the stuff.
Sure.
Because at the time I was buying my cymbals. I mean, I had like some kind of endorsement deal with Pasty for a while, but it wasn't like they weren't like throwing cymbals at me. I still had to buy them, and, you know, I didn't have money. So sometimes I would be like, oh, here's a Meinl on sale, I'll buy that. And that's how it started for me. You know, I was like, okay, this stuff is legit, and this is something I want to play. I like this sound. So that's my reason for, you know, same with Thomas, same with Evans, like, my stuff is great, why change?
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Yeah, I think that sometimes people change when they're feeling a little bored with themselves and they need some fresh inspiration for themselves. And you know, I can't fault them. Everyone's got their reason.
Sure.
But I gotta say, props to you, because you've been around a long time, and in a good way. Not one of those guys who are like, holy crap, when's he gonna leave?
No, I tend to be, when I do something, I'm like dedicated. You know, and that's in all areas of my life. I'm not, you know, I just like, it's the same with a band. If I'm gonna invest my energy into a band, it's gonna be for real, you know.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not like, yeah, I'll see if this is fun for 6 months and then maybe I'll do something else. That's just not my state of mind, never has been. And so the brands, you know, whether it's Meinl, even Tama, they've always been super cool to me, supported me. I see no reason to ever change. You know, I want to have this stuff until I'm dead.
So you're right down the street from Tama in North Hollywood.
I am, yes, exactly.
Do you go hang out? Do you get to go over there?
Yeah, you know, one of the really cool things that Tama, the team at Tama there do is that they'll have us come in to test stuff. So for example, the brand new the pedal that's coming out now, the Dynasync, which I'm using already, their first direct drive pedal is actually something that's been in the works for, I'm gonna say, at least 3 or 4 years. I've been going in there testing prototypes, you know, from the very first like wonky, like, you know, test thing of like, hey, here's a direct drive pedal, yeah, this is not quite good, you know, and then they would come back and have me come back and like, hey, here's a newer version, play it and take notes, and, you know, guys from Japan would come in. So they're very like dedicated to get feedback from the people they work with, which I think is absolutely amazing, especially in the case of something like a pedal, which is, as you know, it needs to be right.
Right, absolutely. Okay, I got one last question for you, and it's totally random and has really nothing to do with drumming. So when you're trying to disconnect from music at the end of the day, and you just need to give your brain a break from everything, and maybe you're just on your phone looking through your socials, just browsing, what type of stuff do you populate Instagram and YouTube with? Like, what other things are you interested in? Could it be fishing? Could it be high performance motorbikes? You know, could it be vintage Mercedes-Benz? Like what kind of things do you dig?
Man, I'm gonna disappoint you because I just don't think I disconnect from music.
Really? No, it's okay. I kind of thought you were gonna say that, but I just wanted to ask.
I'll tell you exactly what my days here look like. So during the day here in this house, we work on Megadeth, right? And that's kind of like variable times and stuff. And then as soon as we wrap up and Dave's like, okay guys, I'll see you guys tomorrow, I go upstairs and I start working on my own music, because I have like this grindcore thing called Ben C that I do. And I write all the music for that. So I play drums, I do guitar. I have Shane Embry from Napalm Death plays bass, and my buddy Sven from Aborted, who I mentioned earlier, is the vocalist. But I write all the stuff, and I record all the guitars. So I literally sit down until like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning.
Really?
I'm here, like, you know, working on my songs.
Wow.
And then I'm just spent and I just go to bed. I mean, of course, you know, I do a little bit of social media, but I'm not a big social media guy. Like, I don't spend a lot of time. I'm probably, I tell myself like I should explore more, you know, because
it's totally cool. Hey, for not being a social media guy, your Instagram has a little over 50,000 followers.
Yeah.
And that's really actually pretty darn good.
Thanks.
So, yeah, I mean, for a guy that's not into it, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I love it, you know, I love the interaction and stuff, but I do play video games sometimes, so that'll be, if anything,
okay,
you know.
There you go, there's something.
I love video games, so I have a little setup there. Sometimes I'll play some Dark Souls and stuff, or with Chris sometimes we'll do some Diablo, like some co-op. But and I love animals. Like if there's anything, you know, that if I wasn't a musician, like let's say, and just, you know, I wasn't doing that for some reason, I would do something with animals. I would probably be, you know, running a sanctuary or helping in some way. You know, I'm extremely concerned about obviously the state of the planet, which, you know, we all should be, I believe. But animals in particular just give me a good feeling, you know.
Oh, sure.
So I love being here and seeing the cows in the field, and like last night I saw some cicadas, and, you know, I wild turkeys. Like, it's cool because I see more stuff here than in North Hollywood where I am. It's very, you know,
yeah.
It's a lot of concrete and stuff, so we don't see as much stuff, even though we do see cool stuff too. But that would be my thing, you know. Animals, for sure.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Dirk, thank you so much for being part of Meinl Radio, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a blast, you know. It's been really fun talking with you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked this episode, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We would appreciate it very much. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.